Late one crisp autumn evening in downtown Chicago, FBI Director Elias Mercer left a secure government facility after a long day of crisis meetings and sensitive briefings. The city's towering skyline was softened by the fading light as he drove along familiar, quiet suburban streets. His unmarked black sedan moved steadily along a well-traveled route, a route he'd taken hundreds of times without incident. Yet on this particular night, as the wind carried a hint of coming winter and leaves rustled along the roadside, something felt off. Elias had been preoccupied with a pressing national security matter and, for a moment, his thoughts were far removed from his surroundings. The rhythmic hum of his engine and the soft glow of streetlights created an illusion of calm, until the piercing flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror shattered that peace. Startled, he slowed and pulled over onto the shoulder of a deserted road. The air turned brisk and tense as he parked his car, carefully checking his mirrors and scanning the darkened road behind him. Moments later, a police cruiser pulled up parallel to his vehicle. Out stepped Deputy Marshal Kent Hollis, a burly, determined officer whose uniform, though official, bore signs of haste and unease. Hollis's face was a study in contradiction, his eyes burned with a mix of authority and apprehension, and his hand hovered near his holster as he approached Elias's car. Without preamble, he barked a demand, license and registration, now, in a voice that echoed off the silent pavement. Elias, ever the consummate professional, calmly reached for his documents. His heart raced slightly, not out of fear but due to the sudden interruption of his carefully maintained composure. However, before he could hand over his credentials, something in Hollis's expression changed. The officer's eyes flickered with an unsettling intensity, and in a swift, disorienting moment, he drew his weapon. "Step out of the vehicle immediately," Hollis ordered, his voice a harsh command that left no room for negotiation. The situation escalated in an instant. Elias's mind raced through decades of training, yet nothing could have prepared him for the surreal nightmare unfolding before him. With measured caution, he slowly opened the driver's side door and stepped out onto the cold, wet pavement, his hands raised in a universal gesture of non-aggression. The deputy's gun was now fixed on him, the beam of a flashlight cutting through the darkness and landing squarely on Elias's chest. For a long, agonizing moment, time seemed to stretch, the cold metal of his car, the trembling of his hands, and the stark reality of being held at gunpoint by a man who should have been his protector. Every second felt like an eternity. Elias's pulse throbbed in his ears as he tried to maintain a steady tone. "Officer, I'm complying," he said softly, each word deliberate. "I'm the FBI Director, Elias Mercer." His calm confession, though meant to de-escalate, only seemed to further confuse and enrage Hollis. The officer's eyes narrowed as if the title was a challenge to his authority. "Save it," Hollis snapped, his grip on the weapon tightening. In that charged moment, the routine stop had spiraled into an incident that would soon ripple through the halls of power and ignite a firestorm of controversy. Unbeknownst to Deputy Hollis, hidden cameras installed by vigilant citizens had been silently recording the entire encounter. Every nuanced gesture, every falter in his voice was being captured and transmitted into the digital ether, a detail that, while invisible in the heat of the moment, would later become critical evidence in the unfolding investigation. As Elias stood there, the reality of the situation sank in. His mind, trained to think clearly under pressure, immediately began processing his options. He could appeal to the officer's sense of duty, or he could simply wait for backup. But before he could articulate any further, the sound of approaching sirens broke the tense silence. It was clear that the moment had reached a critical juncture, a point where the scales of justice would soon tip, and the truth behind this disturbing incident would be forced into the light. In that defining moment, as the flashing lights of federal backup began to paint the dark roadside in bursts of red and blue, Elias Mercer knew that his life, and the integrity of the very institutions he had dedicated his career to, was about to change forever. The peaceful routine of an ordinary night had given way to a confrontation that would not only challenge his authority but would also set off a chain of events destined to expose deep-seated corruption and to reshape the landscape of justice in America. In the tense silence that followed the standoff, Elias Mercer stood motionless in the frigid air, every nerve on high alert as the flashing lights of approaching backup grew louder. His mind raced with both professional calculations and a deep, personal anguish. This was not just a routine misunderstanding but a violent abuse of power that struck at the very heart of justice. As the federal agents closed in, their dark SUVs pooling at the side of the road, Elias could only watch as Deputy Hollis, still seething with a dangerous mix of arrogance and fear, was swiftly disarmed. The metallic clatter of the fallen weapon echoed down the street, marking a turning point in the unfolding crisis. Once Hollis was securely handcuffed and removed from the scene, Special Agent Raquel Tanner led Elias into one of the waiting SUVs. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but methodical. Tanner's team quickly began documenting every detail of the incident. Elias's face, still reflecting the shock of being held at gunpoint, slowly regained its composure as he recounted the events in a calm, measured tone. Every word he spoke was laced with the gravity of his position and the burden of the betrayal he felt, a betrayal not only of his personal dignity but of the trust placed in law enforcement to protect, not to terrorize, its citizens. Back at the scene, hidden cameras, installed by vigilant community activists, continued to capture every nuance of the encounter. Footage of Deputy Hollis's initial approach, the abrupt escalation, and his subsequent panic now circulated discreetly among online forums, igniting a spark of public outrage that had been dormant for too long. Within hours, the hashtag #JusticeForMercer began trending on social media, drawing national attention to the incident. Local news crews arrived on the scene, their cameras and microphones capturing the unfolding drama as community members gathered in small, anxious clusters along the sidewalk, murmuring in disbelief at the sight of an FBI director being mistreated by the very officers sworn to serve the public. At a nearby temporary command center set up by the federal backup team, Detective Kean Lyons and his colleagues began a preliminary investigation. In a cramped room illuminated by the glow of multiple monitors, Kean scrutinized the digital evidence streaming in from the hidden cameras and police body cams. Every frame revealed subtle clues, fleeting moments when Deputy Hollis's demeanor shifted from authority to panic, inconsistencies in his recollection of the events, and even hints of prior complaints that had been inexplicably ignored by his superiors. These details painted a grim picture of a troubled officer, one whose actions that night were not an isolated lapse but perhaps part of a larger, more disturbing pattern. Meanwhile, within the SUV, Elias sat silently, his thoughts a whirlwind of professional duty and personal introspection. He recalled the countless hours of training, the unwavering discipline required to navigate crises, and the heavy responsibility of his office. Yet nothing in his extensive career had prepared him for the humiliation of being overpowered by a local officer, a man who had, in that moment, not only defied protocol but also shattered the sacred trust between law enforcement and the people it was meant to protect. As the vehicle sped through rain-slicked streets toward a secure federal facility, Elias's mind turned to the implications of the incident, the potential fallout from such a blatant abuse of power, and the difficult road ahead in seeking justice and accountability. In the ensuing hours, as federal investigators gathered evidence and local authorities began to piece together a coherent narrative, the gravity of the night's events settled in. The incident was no longer just a personal affront to one man's dignity, it had become a symbol of a deeper malaise within the system, a wake-up call that even the most trusted institutions were susceptible to corruption and misuse of authority. Families in the neighborhood, previously untroubled by the distant echoes of federal operations, now found themselves discussing the case in hushed tones at dinner tables and local diners. The incident sparked conversations about police accountability, the importance of oversight, and the need for reform, conversations that would soon ripple outward into the fabric of the community. By the time Elias arrived at the secure federal facility, his car filled with the quiet hum of determination and the weight of a renewed sense of purpose. Though still shaken by the events, he resolved to ensure that the truth would be unearthed and that no one would be allowed to abuse their power with such impunity again. The initial shock had given way to a steely resolve to transform this moment of injustice into a catalyst for meaningful change, a transformation that would resonate far beyond that cold, fateful night on the outskirts of Chicago. In the agonizing seconds following Deputy Hollis's abrupt order, time seemed to slow for FBI Director Elias Mercer. There, in the dim light of the rain-soaked road, Mercer stood motionless, his uniform immaculate despite the shock, his heart pounding in his ears as he slowly processed the surreal reality of being held at gunpoint by a police officer who had no business wielding such unchecked power. The cold drizzle mingled with the sweat on his brow as he raised his hands in a placating gesture, desperately trying to convey that he meant no harm. Every instinct, honed over decades of high-stakes federal operations, urged him to remain calm, to not escalate the situation. Yet beneath his measured exterior, a storm of disbelief and quiet fury raged. As Deputy Hollis's flashlight beam danced over Mercer's outstretched hands, an eerie tension gripped the night. Hidden in the shadows of nearby buildings, a small network of concerned citizens had long suspected irregularities in local policing practices and had covertly installed cameras to monitor interactions with law enforcement. Unbeknownst to Hollis, these cameras were capturing every subtle nuance, the slight tremor in Mercer's voice as he uttered his name, the fleeting hesitation in Hollis's eyes, and the cold, determined set of Mercer's jaw. Each frame recorded a moment of vulnerability that, when pieced together, painted a damning picture of abuse of authority. For Mercer, the standoff was not just a personal affront, it was a violation of the very principles he had dedicated his career to upholding. His mind raced through protocols and contingency plans even as he maintained his composure, his internal dialogue a meticulous calculation of risk versus the urgent need to preserve his dignity. "Please, officer," he repeated softly, his tone both respectful and firm, "I'm here to cooperate fully. I am the FBI Director, Elias Mercer. Let's resolve this peacefully." Yet, the deputy's face remained obscured in shadow, his features set in a grimace that betrayed a mix of fear and unyielding defiance. Outside, as the first sirens began to echo in the distance, the hidden cameras continued their relentless work. Each captured image, the glint of the deputy's weapon, the steely calm in Mercer's eyes, the rain dripping steadily from his hair, would soon fuel a wave of public scrutiny. The digital evidence, later compiled meticulously by a forensic analyst, promised to turn this isolated incident into a catalyst for sweeping accountability in local law enforcement. Meanwhile, within the confined space of the car's open door, Mercer's mind flickered between memories of his own turbulent beginnings and the solemn duty he now faced. Every heartbeat was a silent testament to his belief that justice must prevail over arrogance and abuse. He recalled the countless nights spent poring over cases where power had been misused, and in that moment, his resolve hardened. He silently vowed that this injustice would not only be rectified but would become a turning point, a spark that would ignite deeper reforms in the system he had always strived to protect. The deputy, however, seemed trapped in his own world of misguided authority. His grip on the weapon tightened as he oscillated between the roles of enforcer and desperado, his posture rigid with the confidence of someone who believed his actions were infallible. But as the distant wail of additional sirens grew louder, his defiant stance wavered. In a split second that felt like an eternity, the internal struggle in his eyes was captured by the vigilant cameras, a silent admission that his grip on power was slipping. Back in the darkness, the approaching federal backup signaled a turning point. The tension on the roadside became nearly unbearable as each second stretched on, until finally, the unmistakable sound of multiple vehicles' engines filled the air. The crescendo of sirens and the rapid steps of armed agents closing in shattered the standoff. Deputy Hollis's defiant facade faltered completely when a team of federal agents, led by Special Agent Raquel Tanner, swiftly moved in and disarmed him in a flurry of precise maneuvers. The officer's weapon clattered onto the asphalt, a discordant note that punctuated the end of his overreach. In that climactic moment, as Mercer was gently escorted into a waiting SUV by federal agents, he allowed himself a brief, inward exhale. Though the night had been marred by an alarming display of unchecked power, the hidden recordings and the immediate intervention promised that justice was on its way. The incident, seared into the digital archives of concerned citizens, would soon spark an investigation that aimed to dismantle a corrupt nexus of authority. And as the car sped away into the rain-drenched darkness, Elias Mercer's resolute gaze remained fixed on the horizon, a silent vow that even in the depths of such a breach, the light of accountability would ultimately prevail. As the sound of sirens pierced the heavy night air, a palpable shift occurred on the rain-slicked road. Elias Mercer, still reeling from the shock of being held at gunpoint, watched as a fleet of federal SUVs approached with flashing lights that cut through the darkness. The steady rumble of engines grew louder, heralding the arrival of federal backup. Within moments, Special Agent Raquel Tanner emerged from one of the vehicles, her presence commanding and resolute. Clad in a dark tactical vest over a crisp uniform, her determined eyes swept over the tense scene before her. "Officer, drop your weapon immediately." Agent Tanner's voice rang out, firm and unwavering, shattering the oppressive silence that had gripped the area. Deputy Kent Hollis, his earlier bravado now wavering under the relentless approach of well-coordinated federal agents, hesitated, a critical pause that revealed the uncertainty behind his aggressive facade. In that split second, a team of agents moved swiftly, disarming him with precise, practiced movements. The sharp metallic sound of his weapon hitting the wet asphalt echoed like a final, condemning note, marking the abrupt end of his unchecked authority. Elias Mercer, still standing near his car with his hands raised in a gesture of compliance, felt a surge of relief mix with a lingering shock. The intervention had been swift and decisive. As Agent Tanner guided him toward a waiting SUV, Mercer's mind raced through the implications of what had just transpired. He recalled every meticulous detail of that fraught encounter, the cold command, the officer's erratic behavior, and now the undeniable proof, silently recorded by hidden cameras, that would soon expose the abuse of power. Inside the SUV, the atmosphere was tense yet controlled. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic sound of raindrops on the roof provided a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted just moments before. Mercer's eyes remained fixed on the darkened road as he recounted the events in a measured, composed tone, each word laced with the weight of decades of experience and the burden of betrayal. He knew that this incident, though terrifying, could not be allowed to fade into obscurity. It was a breach of trust that would demand accountability. Meanwhile, outside the immediate scene, the flashing lights of federal vehicles formed a protective barrier. Officers moved in an orchestrated pattern, securing the area, collecting evidence, and taking statements from onlookers who had silently gathered along the curb. The hidden cameras, strategically placed by concerned citizens, continued to record every nuanced moment, capturing the fading defiance in Deputy Hollis's eyes, the determined resolve on Agent Tanner's face, and the subdued expressions of witnesses who had never imagined they would witness such a dramatic reversal of power. As the federal agents worked methodically, a subtle but profound change began to ripple through the community. The incident quickly ignited a storm on social media, with hashtags like #JusticeForMercer trending across platforms. The digital evidence, meticulously preserved by independent activists, began to paint a damning portrait of systemic misconduct, a stark reminder that even those entrusted with public safety were not immune to abuse of power. For Elias Mercer, the intervention marked a turning point. Although the night had been marred by a harrowing display of authority gone awry, the swift arrival of federal backup had ensured his safety and set the stage for a wider investigation into the department's practices. As he sat quietly in the back of the SUV, Mercer's thoughts turned to the future, a future where every misuse of power would be challenged and where the truth, once hidden in the shadows, would illuminate the path toward justice and reform. In that critical moment on the rain-drenched roadside, amid the chaos of flashing lights and rising voices, the dark incident began to transform into a catalyst for change. The promise of accountability had been signaled not only by the immediate intervention but also by the resolute determination of those who refused to let injustice prevail. With every beat of his heart, Elias Mercer silently vowed that this breach of trust would spark a movement that would soon echo through the halls of power, ensuring that no one, no matter how deeply entrenched in authority, could ever again trample on the rights of the innocent. And so, as the federal convoy drove away into the night, leaving behind the echoes of a shattered routine, the incident stood as a somber reminder that even in our darkest hours, the light of accountability and justice can emerge, paving the way for a future built on truth, reform, and unwavering integrity. In the aftermath of that fateful night, a relentless investigation began that would shake the foundations of local law enforcement and send ripples throughout the community. Back at the secure federal facility where Elias Mercer was debriefed, a team of digital forensic experts, led by the meticulous Kian Lyons, gathered around rows of computer screens. The hidden footage, recorded by citizen-installed cameras, was being analyzed frame by frame. Kian's eyes, fixed intently on the grainy images, revealed subtle but damning details: the deputy's shifting gaze, a whispered conversation in the background, and timestamps that conflicted sharply with the official incident report. Every anomaly was noted down with precision, each one further undermining the narrative that had justified the violent stop. Meanwhile, Special Agent Raquel Tanner coordinated with local police and federal investigators to secure every piece of evidence from the scene. Interviews were conducted with witnesses who had seen the encounter from the sidewalk, men, women, and even teenagers whose voices, once quiet in the wake of the incident, now rang out with urgent testimony. A local shop owner recalled the moment the flashing lights had appeared and described the shocked expressions on the faces of passers-by. Her recollections, coupled with data from nearby surveillance cameras, painted a vivid picture of chaos and abrupt intervention. At a press conference held in a downtown community center the following morning, federal officials announced that an internal review had been launched. The spokesperson, with measured gravity, outlined how the digital dossier compiled by Kian Lyons and the testimonies from multiple witnesses were forcing an unprecedented examination of police conduct. Social media lit up with hashtags like #JusticeForMercer and #NoMoreExcessiveForce, and the public outcry was palpable. Local news outlets scrambled to broadcast live updates, and national headlines soon began to reflect a growing demand for accountability within the department. Within the corridors of the federal facility, Elias Mercer, though still recovering from the emotional shock of that night, met privately with high-ranking officials and the district attorney. Their conversation was intense and fraught with concern. They discussed the implications of a local officer's abuse of power and how it reflected a broader systemic issue. Mercer's calm yet determined tone made it clear that this incident was not merely a personal affront, it was a clarion call to reform a broken system. "We cannot allow this abuse to continue unchecked," he stated firmly. "Every detail, every bit of digital evidence, must be scrutinized to restore trust in our institutions." Back in the investigation room, the team worked late into the night. Kian's report, filled with annotated screenshots, digital fingerprints, and detailed comparisons of official logs versus independent recordings, became the linchpin of the inquiry. The evidence not only implicated Deputy Hollis for his reckless actions but also hinted at a deeper, more troubling pattern of behavior that had gone unpunished for years. The meticulous work of the forensic team revealed that similar incidents, previously dismissed or brushed aside, had been recorded but never thoroughly examined. This discovery set off a cascade of internal audits and reviews within the department, forcing higher-ups to confront uncomfortable truths about their oversight mechanisms. As the investigation unfolded, community activists and legal reform advocates began organizing peaceful rallies and town hall meetings. They demanded transparency and justice, urging the federal government to implement stricter controls on police conduct and to honor the rights of every citizen, regardless of rank. The collective voice of the people grew louder with each passing day, and local legislators were soon called to testify before a special committee investigating the incident. Within this charged environment, the digital evidence reached a tipping point. An independent review panel, comprised of experts in law enforcement, digital forensics, and civil rights, convened to examine Kian's dossier. Their preliminary findings were damning. The evidence suggested not only that Deputy Hollis had overstepped his authority but that there had been a deliberate attempt to conceal the true nature of the incident from both the public and higher authorities. The panel's report, when released, sent shockwaves through the community and was hailed as a turning point for police accountability. For Elias Mercer, the unfolding investigation was both a personal vindication and a professional catalyst. He had long believed in the integrity of the system he helped to safeguard, yet that night had revealed its vulnerabilities. Now, with the relentless pursuit of truth by digital experts, activists, and federal investigators, the foundation was being laid for sweeping reforms. Mercer's resolve was renewed. He vowed that the incident would not be forgotten, that every misuse of power would be met with swift, uncompromising justice. As the weeks turned into months, the investigation continued to unravel layers of corruption that had once been hidden in plain sight. Each new revelation brought both anger and hope, anger at the betrayal of public trust, and hope that the long-overdue reform was finally within reach. The case of Deputy Hollis became a symbol of a system at a crossroads, one that would soon be transformed by the combined efforts of those who refused to let injustice prevail. In that restless period of scrutiny and reform, every piece of digital evidence, every recorded whisper of dissent, coalesced into a movement for accountability. It was a movement that promised to shine a light on the darkest corners of power and to ensure that the voices of the oppressed would not be silenced again. And as the investigation gathered momentum, it set the stage for a future where every abuse of authority would be exposed, a future where justice would truly be blind, yet never indifferent. In the days that followed the standoff, the true investigation into the incident began in a small, cluttered federal office where the glow of multiple computer monitors illuminated stacks of case files and scattered notes. At the center of this flurry was Kian Lyons, a brilliant digital forensic analyst whose tireless determination had become the catalyst for unveiling the truth behind the harrowing encounter. Every night, in the quiet solitude of his modest workspace, Kian meticulously sifted through the hidden camera footage, grainy, raw images captured by vigilant citizens who had sensed something amiss that fateful evening. He scrutinized every frame, searching for the subtle details, the slight twitch in Deputy Hollis's eye, a whispered conversation caught on a broken audio channel, and discrepancies in the official timestamps that marked each recorded event. Kian's fingers danced across the keyboard as he compiled his findings into a comprehensive digital dossier. He discovered that several pieces of evidence, which the official report claimed were in perfect chronological order, actually contained gaps and alterations that could only be explained by deliberate tampering. One video clip, for instance, revealed that while the deputy's body cam recorded a smooth progression of events, an independent camera installed by an activist captured a jarring moment where Hollis's expression shifted from stern authority to a flash of uncertainty, a detail that was conspicuously absent from the official version. As Kian compared metadata from multiple sources, he began to notice patterns, emails with inconsistent timestamps, security footage that had been edited, and even phone calls recorded on nearby public devices that hinted at prearranged communications among officers. The digital dossier quickly grew into a sprawling archive of evidence, annotated with Kian's detailed observations and technical analysis. Every anomaly was catalogued, every discrepancy noted in careful, clinical language that left little room for doubt. With each new piece of data, the dossier painted an increasingly damning picture of a system that had not only overstepped its bounds but had actively concealed the truth. It was as if the very fabric of the official narrative was unraveling under the relentless scrutiny of a single, determined investigator. Outside his office, the movement for justice began to take on a life of its own. Social media platforms exploded with the hashtag #JusticeForMercer, and local news outlets picked up the story, broadcasting snippets of Kian's findings to an outraged public. Community activists rallied around the digital evidence, organizing meetings and calling for an independent review of the entire incident. Every new upload, every shared clip, further fueled the momentum of a movement that refused to let the abuse of power remain hidden. Within the federal facility, higher-ups convened an emergency meeting, urging transparency and promising to scrutinize every detail of the case. Director Mercer, though still recovering from the emotional trauma of that night, stood resolute as he reviewed Kian's dossier. He saw in it not just the raw, unfiltered truth of what had transpired, but also the opportunity to catalyze sweeping reforms in local law enforcement practices. This evidence, Mercer said in a somber tone during a closed briefing with his top advisors, is a stark reminder that we must hold every officer accountable. We cannot allow unchecked power to dictate the lives of our citizens. His words resonated deeply with everyone in the room, setting the stage for a new chapter in the battle for justice. As the investigation into the incident deepened, Kian's digital dossier became the linchpin for a broader inquiry into systemic abuses. Independent auditors, civil rights lawyers, and even sympathetic local officials began to cross-examine the official records, finding more inconsistencies and instances of misconduct. Each revelation was a building block in the case against the rogue officer and a turning point that galvanized public opinion. The evidence, painstakingly gathered and corroborated from multiple sources, promised that the truth would soon be laid bare before a nation that had long suffered in silence. In that relentless pursuit of accountability, the digital dossier was not merely a collection of numbers and images, it became a symbol of hope, a beacon for all those who believed that even the darkest moments could be illuminated by truth. With every passing day, as Kian's report was shared and scrutinized, the scales of justice began to tip in favor of transparency and reform. And so, in that small, determined office, amidst the hum of computers and the quiet clatter of keystrokes, the seeds of systemic change were sown, a change that would eventually echo through the corridors of power and redefine the very meaning of accountability in a society desperate for real justice. The trial of Deputy Kent Hollis unfolded in a packed federal courtroom that buzzed with tension and anticipation. Over the course of several days, the public and legal communities converged to demand accountability for the night when FBI Director Elias Mercer was held at gunpoint. The courtroom, once a symbol of unchallenged authority, had transformed into a crucible for truth, as every piece of digital evidence and every witness testimony was brought under scrutiny. At the heart of the proceedings was the formidable digital dossier compiled by forensic expert Kian Lyons. Prosecutor Gideon Blackwell presented this meticulously organized evidence to a captivated audience. Screen by screen, he laid bare a series of anomalies, altered timestamps on official documents, covert footage capturing fleeting moments when Deputy Hollis's demeanor shifted from confident authority to palpable panic, and whispered exchanges recorded in the background that hinted at collusion. Each clip was introduced with deliberate care, leaving no doubt that the official narrative had been constructed to conceal a much darker reality. Witnesses who had once been intimidated into silence now stepped forward. One such witness, a young patrol officer who had worked under Hollis for several years, recounted in a quavering voice how he had seen the deputy casually brag about teaching people a lesson during a routine traffic stop. His testimony was corroborated by another officer, whose detailed account of internal complaints and previous incidents of excessive force painted a damning picture of a pattern of abuse. The courtroom was filled with murmurs of shock and indignation as the testimonies, once hidden in the shadows of bureaucracy, came to light. FBI Director Elias Mercer, still bearing the emotional scars of that fateful night, took the stand. In his measured, steady voice, he recounted the harrowing details of the incident, the flashing lights, the cold command to exit his vehicle, the unnerving brandishing of a firearm, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal by a man who was supposed to protect. His testimony was calm yet searing, each word underscored by decades of experience and an unyielding commitment to justice. Mercer's narrative not only humanized the ordeal but also underscored the urgency of the call for systemic reform. His eyes, filled with both pain and determination, silently spoke of the need for accountability, a need that resonated with everyone present. Meanwhile, the defense for Deputy Hollis attempted to salvage their case by arguing that the incident had been a miscommunication, a rogue act by an isolated officer under immense stress. Their attorney claimed that the deputy had been provoked and that his actions, though regrettable, did not reflect a pattern of abuse. However, every argument was systematically dismantled by the overwhelming evidence. The digital dossier, cross-referenced with eyewitness accounts and official records, left little room for doubt. As Kian Lyons's technical analysis was played on the courtroom's large display screen, even seasoned legal professionals could not ignore the inconsistencies. The deputy's statements, once given with a veneer of authority, were shown to be riddled with contradictions when compared with independent recordings. Public pressure mounted outside the courtroom. Protesters gathered on the steps of the federal building, chanting slogans and holding signs emblazoned with messages like #Justice for Mercer and "No more unchecked power." Social media platforms exploded with real-time updates, video snippets, and impassioned commentary that added a dynamic layer of accountability to the proceedings. Every new piece of evidence sparked further outrage and solidarity, making it clear that this trial was about more than just one officer's misconduct. It was a fight for the integrity of the entire justice system. As the trial neared its conclusion, the emotional intensity in the courtroom reached a crescendo. One by one, witnesses recanted their earlier statements under the weight of cross-examination by Mariella Quinton, the defense attorney who had become the fierce voice for Javon Hart's case. Their tearful admissions of being coerced or misled further eroded the credibility of the prosecution's case. The palpable shift in the courtroom was not lost on Judge Ronald Pierce, who watched the proceedings with a growing sense of disquiet. Even his solemn expression could not mask the gravity of the evidence now laid before the jury. Finally, after days of relentless testimony and evidence presentation, the jury retired to deliberate. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation, the tension almost unbearable. When the verdict was finally read, a unanimous guilty verdict on all counts, the courtroom erupted in a mix of subdued relief and cathartic outrage. Deputy Kent Hollis was sentenced to several years in federal prison, and his conviction became a rallying cry for reforms in law enforcement practices across the nation. In that moment, as the gavel struck with a final, resounding blow, the courthouse seemed to exhale a collective sigh of relief. The trial had not only vindicated Elias Mercer and exposed a disturbing abuse of power but had also ignited a movement for transparency and accountability. The meticulous work of digital forensic experts, the bravery of whistleblowers, and the steadfast determination of legal advocates had culminated in a turning point for the justice system, a turning point that promised that no one, regardless of their rank, would be allowed to trample on the rights of the innocent. As the courtroom slowly emptied, the echoes of the day's proceedings lingered like a solemn promise. The digital dossier, now an undeniable testament to the truth, had not only sealed Deputy Hollis's fate but had also set in motion a wave of reform that would reshape the landscape of law enforcement. And while the wounds of that fateful night would take time to heal, the trial's outcome offered a beacon of hope, a reminder that when truth is pursued relentlessly, even the most entrenched corruption can be dismantled, paving the way for a future defined by justice and integrity. In the weeks that followed the trial's dramatic conclusion, Crestwood County began to emerge from a long night of injustice into a future that shone with the promise of reform and renewal. The fallout from Deputy Hollis's conviction had sent shockwaves throughout the community and ignited a nationwide call for accountability in law enforcement. Across the city, public outcry gave way to concrete action. Local government officials, spurred by the relentless efforts of civil rights activists and the digital dossier that had exposed every inconsistency, enacted sweeping reforms aimed at ensuring that no officer could once again abuse their power unchecked. Elias Mercer returned to his office with a heavy heart but an unyielding resolve to see justice restored. Though he had experienced firsthand the violation of trust that comes when a supposed protector turns predator, he was determined to channel that pain into meaningful change. In his public addresses, he spoke plainly about the need for transparency, stricter oversight, and community involvement in the reform process. "Tonight, we stand at the threshold of a new dawn," he declared at a press conference, "where accountability will no longer be optional, and every citizen's rights will be protected by a system that honors the truth." His words resonated deeply with a public that had grown tired of stories of unchecked abuse and systemic corruption. Meanwhile, Special Agent Raquel Tanner and Detective Kian Lyons spearheaded a series of internal investigations that led to the implementation of advanced body cameras, independent review panels, and rigorous training programs for all law enforcement personnel in the county. The digital evidence that had once been hidden in the shadows was now archived transparently, accessible to oversight committees and civil rights organizations committed to ensuring that justice was not only done, but seen to be done. Community leaders organized town hall meetings and workshops, inviting citizens to voice their concerns and contribute to the creation of new policies. These initiatives fostered an environment of cooperation, where the voices of ordinary people became a powerful force for reform. At a specially organized ceremony held in a revitalized civic center, a mural depicting a radiant sunrise over a united community was unveiled, a living symbol of hope and transformation. Families, activists, and even those who had once been skeptical gathered to celebrate the monumental changes. The atmosphere was electric with optimism and collective pride. Chief Justice Thaddeus Sinclair, who had long been a pillar of integrity, took to the stage to honor the courage of those who had fought to expose the corruption. Today, we honor not only justice, but the spirit of every individual who refused to accept silence in the face of abuse, he proclaimed, his voice echoing over the assembled crowd. In a quiet moment away from the celebrations, Elias Mercer reflected on the tumultuous journey that had brought him to this new era. The sting of that fateful night on the roadside still lingered, yet it had also become the catalyst for change, a reminder that even the deepest betrayals could be transformed into stepping stones toward a more just society. As he looked out over the crowd of supporters, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His work, though fraught with challenges, was a constant battle for truth and reform, a battle that, in the end, had begun to tip the scales in favor of justice. Aurelia Sinclair, once a symbol of the system's failure, now stood tall among her peers, her eyes bright with the promise of a future defined not by past prejudices but by the unyielding pursuit of fairness. Her quiet resilience and willingness to speak out had inspired a movement that reached every corner of Crestwood County and beyond. Local media hailed her story as a turning point, a testament to the power of the human spirit when bolstered by truth and community solidarity. As dusk settled on that historic day, the once tarnished walls of the courthouse now shimmered in the soft glow of renewal. Every whispered word of injustice that had echoed through its corridors was now being replaced by declarations of accountability, and the promise of a reformed justice system shone like a beacon in the night. For Elias Mercer, Chief Justice Sinclair, and every brave soul who had dared to challenge the status quo, the journey was far from over, but the first steps toward healing had been taken. In that new dawn, amid the joyful clamor of community celebration and the solemn vows for continuous reform, the promise of a better future, one where every voice would be heard and every abuse of power would be rooted out, became an unbreakable reality.